All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming to our event tonight to launch 3 new books. I want to welcome Elise Gregory, Christopher Chambers, and Jim Landwehr tonight. It's so awesome they could be here. This is our first in-person in quite a while. We usually do our launches on Zoom. So very grateful for everyone being here tonight, even despite the weather. So I'm Angela Green. I'm your host. I'm also event coordinator and editor for the Cornerstone Press. How tonight's going to go is we're going to have readings from our authors, and the rest of the event will be a Q&A. We also have this streamed on YouTube, so if you're watching from YouTube, you can type in any questions that you have for the authors, and anyone in the audience as well can come up and ask some questions at the end of the event. So now I'd like to welcome Dr. Taggett here to say a few words tonight.
I'll just probably do this. Yeah, that's a little bit easier. Hi, everybody. Well, welcome. It's nice to see people in person. The press had multiple events, as Angela mentioned, during the pandemic. We launched several titles via Zoom webinar, and we'll continue to do those. My children are here as well, so if she screams out, "I love you," or "You're famous," that's good stuff, right? But we're happy to have an in-person event again. So I just have a few thank yous, a short introduction for everyone, and then I'll get out of Angela's way, and we'll begin the event. So, good evening. I am the director and publisher of Cornerstone Press here at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, which is a student staff publishing house. It's one of only five in the United States. There's actually 2 in the state of Wisconsin now, which is really cool. So our system is producing some really cool work. I'm pleased to welcome you to the launch of our newest titles, Kind of Blue by Chris Chambers, The Clayfields by Elise Gregory, and At the Lake by Jim Landwehr, who are all joining us this evening. Tonight you will have the chance to listen to the authors, read from their new works, as well as discuss their stories and writing strategies with our press event coordinator, Angela, who you've already met. The event is also special because each of our featured writers hails from Wisconsin. Chris lives in Madison, Elise lives in Ellsworth, and Jim lives in Waukesha. So that's why we're having this special event this evening. It's not every day we get to publish 3 Wisconsin writers in rapid succession, all living within drivable distance of Stevens Point. So we took advantage of our central locale, and they all agreed to come. So we're very happy to have them here. So we're so pleased that they agreed to join us in person to celebrate their work and the work of the press that brought their work to the fore. So before we get to all of that, though, I need to thank a number of people for their support of the press in various ways. So press executive editor Jeff Snowbarger and senior editors Lexi Neely, Monica Swinnick, and Kala Butke. Jeff's actually here. Chancellor Thomas Gibson and Provost Levon Cornell Swanson. Their support's really important. Dean Joshua Hagan of the College of Letters and Science and Assistant Dean Tobias Barsky of the School of Humanities and Global Studies. The Chair Rebecca Stevens of the Department of English, as well as the entire faculty and staff of that department. This is a teaching press, so all of the staff take courses within that department. So it's important the department supports the efforts of the press, as they do consistently. Lindsay Cheever and Samantha Petch of the School of Humanities and Global Studies. Ihor Bartoszewski and Michael Martin of the university's IT department. And Chris also, is it Chris Wiley? Is that right? I didn't have you on my list. I got it right. Chris Wiley's helping us out this evening with IT, as well as his team back there. So we're really happy to have their help tonight. Associate Vice Chancellor Christina Rickert and Heidi Wallner of UWSP Financial Operations. Carrie Hebler, Brittany Kaminsky, and Nick Schultz of University Communications and Marketing. Robin Spindler and his staff at the Point Print Design Studio. We print all of our books on campus at the Point Print Design Studio, and Rob Spindler does a phenomenal job for us. Not only finding good pricing, but the quality of the books is great, and we're so happy that we can have a fully in-house publishing process, that everything is done right here on campus. So we're really happy with Rob and his staff there. Sue Fisher and Eva Hathaway of UWSP Facility Services and Central Stores. They do all of our mailing, so that's really important, obviously. Katie Horn of the UWSP Store and Text Rental, the Bookshop Co-op of Stevens Point, and Bound to Happen Bookstore of Stevens Point, our local bookstores. So, most importantly, though, our press would not be possible without the energetic participation from our diverse student staff, comprised mostly of English majors and minors at UWSP. So thank you to all of my student staff from the spring of 2022, where a lot of these books started their editorial process. It's been a year in the making, so a lot of the staff worked on these books at various points throughout the last year. For doing this hard work of publishing with such professionalism and excitement. It's great to work with students that really care about the work that they do, so thank you for that. I'd also especially like to thank our current executive staff, so editorial director Brett Hill, managing editor Maria Scherer, senior editorial assistant Grace Dahl, Production Director Amanda Liebem, Production Editor Julia Kaufman, Media Director Abby Wazlewski, Sales Director Patrick Fogarty, and Events Coordinator Angela Green. That team works very hard as the directors. They take courses, but they don't get any extra money or time for what they do. They take on those responsibilities as part of the class, so that's really important that they step up to do that hard work for us. We appreciate it. So finally, of course, I'd like to thank the talent, Chris, Elise, and Jim here for entrusting us with their excellent work. Tonight is a celebration of their writing, all in different genres, and the dedicated and talented writers that make it possible. So thank you all for being here. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our MC, Angela Green. Thank you all for coming and for supporting Cornerstone Press. At the end of the event, there'll be a book signing and a sale where all the authors will be here to sign books and chat with you about their work. Enjoy the evening. Thank you so much.
Right, thank you, Dr. Tagenall. So now we're just going to kick it off. We're going to do ladies first tonight. We're going to start with Elise Gregory reading from her collection, The Clayfields.
Great. This is wonderful. It's great to be in person and also online. Like Angela said, I have The Clayfields that I'm going to read from, and it's a novel in stories, and it follows the pretty much the three lives of the three women and how they interact. If you open it up, it has a lot of chapters, and they can almost stand alone, most of them, and I've had a couple published in literary journals, so they stand just fine, and then others kind of act as a bridge into other chapters, kind of to bring characters together and to continue the story. And I think that the land is a really big part of this piece. So a lot about like rural Wisconsin. And I'm gonna just read this chapter about a bar because I find that bars and churches are great places to meet people, and it's a great place for somebody to sit down on either a pew or a bar stool and really just tell you probably more than what you want, but it's also kind of interesting what comes out of these places. So this is the Junction Bar, and this character isn't maybe the main female character, but I really like this character. She's one that spoke to me pretty quickly on in the process, and she's a great person to move other characters in and out because she's in the bar, she's the bartender. So, the Junction Bar was set back from the road, front door opened stream side. Customers came from between junk river trees or from the farms and the hills above. Most days, the lot, if it could be called that, was full. If a stranger sat down, Emil loaded them up with tchotchkes. A young stranger fiddled with an orange hunting multi-tool equipped with toothpick, whistle, and flashlight. Emil had also given him a hot pink koozie cover and baseball cap. He hadn't refused, which meant something to her after a long week of local old men. The stench of last night's manure still stunk up the air, even though Emil had doused everything with 3 parts water to 1 part bleach. Now it smelled like bleached shit, and this outsider's cologne, which was warm and inviting for a change. Her circle of cleaning had narrowed around him. With the slow draw of early spring evening, she'd had one other customer. The farmers out tending their fields fresh off winter. Anyone says managing a bar in the sticks is easy, better sit down and call a cab. Emil swiped a suds-filled rag under his beer mug, invading his space again as he'd invaded hers. Now, when that old hag went and shot her man a couple of dozen times, then came in here for a drink, that was bad for business. All those police questioning my customers, who wants to drink beer when cops are like flies? So why'd she come here? The stranger asked. He boasted one of those gelled faux mohawk haircuts. He was young, So she continued with him, even if he was from the cities. You mean you haven't heard? She put her damp hands on her hips, pleased with how they flared, the rest of her frame strong from all the riding and chores. She wasn't yet cushioned by too many whiskey sours, though regulars could see the softness was coming on. She threw her body into the story, sick of her Jed's cemented feet. Sick of living together for months in his apartment without one slip into the next step. Here was fresh DNA that could be added to the homogeneous gene pool. It was one pheromone talking to another, baby. So this old bat a couple houses down the road comes in while I'm working, and I've got a whole bar full of farmers right after harvest eating burgers, drinking bloodies, having a fine time after a hard day and evening. Emile took a sip of her drink, watched how the stranger was taking it before starting again. She sits at the bar, says how she just mopped up a big mess of blood, and would I make her a rum and coke? I sort of know her, you know. She comes in with her skinny husband and drinks like a fish. Man, can she put them back. If she wasn't so mean, she'd drink the guys under the table, but nobody wants to be near her. And her husband asking for pickled pig's feet, gizzards, eggs. Never knew folks still ate that crap. He'd be nibbling at those stinky things while she's drinking. I never seen her stumble. Anyhow, I know they ain't farmers, so it ain't cow's blood, and if it really ain't the birthing season, I'm thinking maybe she's hunting. Was she full of blood? No, scary girl had every stringy gray hair slicked back in that little bun of hers, Mennonite-like, maybe Amish. She was just sitting there drinking. The guy slid his empty mug forward with a stitch of irritation on her brow at his interruption. Emile filled it with spotted cow. I love this stuff. The guy tapped the now golden glass. Foam buried his upper lip. He sucked it. Emile frowned. He was starting to rub her wrong, like a city slicker. Sorry, he mumbled, and looked into her eyes again. She leaned forward across the bar, her scoop shirt too low. So I ask her, what blood? It's just what she's wanting. She goes into this rant about him smacking her for burning dinner, which I still don't believe. She takes out the .22, and he doesn't think she'll shoot him, just laughs. Whoa, do they have kids? Yeah, like my age. I think their son was a couple of years ahead of me in school. They've been married decades, right? Probably lost their virginity to each other. Grown kids, grandkids. Her man laughs because it's going to take a hell of a long time to kill someone with a .22, and she shoots him. He swears, and she shoots him again and again. She reloads and keeps shooting. 20 times she shot that poor sorry guy. Bet he never saw that coming. He took a large swig of beer. She just unloads all this on you? Yeah. I ask if he's dead. She says, does a bear shit in the woods? Like it's some joke. She's sitting in the bar while her man's full of holes 2 houses down the road. Well, I guess he learned how to whistle, the city slicker laughed, but Emile didn't join him. He took a long slug from his beer, re-engaged. What did you do? I was freaking out, but trying not to show it. I mean, I've got a murderer in my bar just how to do drinking. She says, just cleaned up the mess and needed to wet the whistle. Scary old bat. Emile took a sip of her Coke with just a splash of rum, readying herself for the finale. I wait a bit because I'm afraid she's watching me and I can't tell any of the guys. You must have been pissing your pants, he tapped his glass again. As she was refilling, Emile thought how this guy probably balled up his dirty socks and shoved them down the sides of couch cushions. She'd already had a crumb of a boyfriend who did that until she couldn't bring herself to screw him without thinking about dirty socks. Jed never did that. Jed never interrupted her during a good story. She slid the glass in front of the stranger with a huff and hiked her shirt up into a more appropriate neckline. Rude men, no boobies. I had to sneak into the bathroom and call the cops before she finished her drink. She's pleading insanity, but she's just a snake. There's a professor, adjunct really, who's being tried for murder. She cut up her boyfriend and offloaded the taped box of him to a boyfriend. Yeah, I heard that. Not from here, she snapped. He'd missed the point. She wasn't interested in murderesses. She poured a mug for an old regular. Good to see you, Polly. It's like you breed husband killers in these pastures. The city slicker waved his hand around the near-empty bar as if to bring about a hen house of murderesses. Nah, said Emile. It's just country feminism. She moved to chat up Paul, who had just taken his usual stool beside the old jukebox. Thank you. And I'm sorry about the swears that I dropped. I didn't realize that there would be kids in the audience. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Elise. Next up, we have Christopher Chambers reading from his book, Kind of Blue.
Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you to Ross and everyone at the press. This has really been a great experience, and I'm happy to be here. I had a hard time deciding what to read, and I decided to read this story that's it has undergrads in it, since I figured there might be some undergrads here. I never thought of myself as a writer of historical fiction, but then I started rereading this, and I was like, oh my God. This is set in the 1980s. So it was before cell phones. Some of you may remember that. I tend to talk too much at readings, so I'll try to just jump right in here and start reading. This is called Rhinelander. Grimsrud and I returned home from the corner bar, expecting to find, as usual, only the individual quarts of milk and partial loaves of white bread, this month's block of government cheese, a case of ramen noodles, and dregs of a liter of Canadian whiskey. It was therefore initially high excitement for us to discover a bona fide fugitive occupying the old floral sofa in the living room, making himself right at home upon it. Our other roommate, Sikorsky, was visibly wrought while introducing us to the fugitive McNulty. Sikorsky was actually physically shaking as he made the introductions. I took note of this. Sikorsky had always been an icon of cool, our big city roommate. Home was what we called this clapboard house in the student ghetto at the edge of the downtown strip, conveniently in walking distance to the bars and the food mart. The old frame house had been partitioned into student apartments with little apparent thought or planning, and likely in violation of local building codes. Home was where the fugitive McNulty had commenced to lay his head, to make himself at home, that is. My room, which opened onto the living room, had once been a formal dining room, to judge by the fancy cut-glass ceiling fixture and the built-in buffet. The other bedrooms upstairs included one, Sikorsky's, that had once been a walk-in closet, a low-ceilinged dormer with a drafty window and no heat register. In the living room, McNulty had been laying his head on our sofa, on a gallon-sized Ziploc freezer bag of weed. Sleeping there, so to speak, if you want to call it sleep, his head on this big bag of weed there on our sofa, eyes almost but not quite closed, as if any of us would dare to touch McNulty's bag of weed, or his sinister, greasy backpack, which slumped between the sofa and the big green upholstered chair that I'd discovered last summer outside the Goodwill drop box in the parking lot at the end of the block, and carried home down the alley balanced on my head. There were 3 of us roommates, a number that dwindled down from 7 due to summer, when some of those of us enrolled at the local college leave town. I and Grimsrud and Sikorsky remained, working at jobs within walking distance to pay tuition in the fall. Grimsrud at the second-run movie theater, Sikorsky the old folks' home, and the plastic injection factory for me. Historically, it was late in the era of affordable higher education, a decade past the summer of love, early in the war on drugs. Ronald Reagan, a B-movie cowboy actor, had been elected governor of the great state of California. The days passed uneasily. When he was there at the house, McNulty stretched out on the sofa, occasionally with his eyes closed, but in 2 weeks he had yet to take off his boots. He otherwise made himself at home. He played our records without cleaning them and would leave them spinning on the turntable, the needle nodding insistently against the label at the vinyl's end. When he would leave the house, he'd holler without variation and regardless of who was home or the time of day or night, that should any of us punks touch his shit, we would die. The word was that McNulty's unexpected relocation to western Wisconsin was due to a disagreement with the Twin Cities chapter of the Bandoleros Motorcycle Club regarding payment for a quantity of crystal meth in a 2-pound bag of weed. There was also apparently further bad blood between the parties. He may have also beaten up one or more of the bikers. We gathered innuendo and allusion. We learned things secondhand from Sikorsky in an uncharacteristically hushed voice when McNulty happened to leave the room for a moment. McNulty was not especially tall, but he was noticeably wide. He took up a lot of space, physically and psychologically. He was bulky and menacing in an unsubtle way. We learned interesting details of McNulty over the weeks and the days and weeks following his appearance in our living room. McNulty's mother was from a reservation in North Dakota, Sikorsky told us. I figured his father must have been Irish. We heard McNulty had been on the street or locked up since he was 11 or 12. It was a heart-aching story, but I found it difficult to muster sympathy for little McNulty while Big McNulty was eating our ramen noodles and drinking our milk and had essentially occupied our living room, regularly threatening our well-being. I found myself feeling a little guilty, though, for having a home such as it was and my own drunken father around throughout my own unremarkable mid-American youth. McNulty had been in more jails than I had been in states, though I had dreams of someday crossing the Mississippi River, of seeing mountains and the big sky country. I had been in a couple different states, including Florida once, the Sunshine State, which is another story. McNulty told us of a time he was in jail in Palm Beach County. He did 300 push-ups and 300 sit-ups every day and would brawl alongside the Mexicans against the blacks in great awful battles. I had never brawled, never been in jail, and had never been to Texas, where McNulty punched a deputy sheriff in the face. He spent some time in Texas. So McNulty came to be laying low in our living room in America's Dairyland, unbeknownst to anyone except us roommates. We could thank Sikorsky for McNulty's presence. Sikorsky knew McNulty from their childhood on the mean streets of northeast Minneapolis. Also, there was apparently a handgun in McNulty's backpack, which he liked to keep close at hand. It occurred to me that the smart thing would be to just leave town until this all played out or blew over. But there was an undeniable allure as well as inertia at play. I felt as if I could not leave or look away, even when, and it seemed certain they would, angry bikers arrived to kick down the door. They would be looking for vengeance, looking for blood, for meth and weed and money. They'd be looking for McNulty, though most likely they would not be terribly discriminating. anyone in proximity who was not McNulty would be nonetheless at risk. Is it in Ecclesiastes where it says about the wise man and the fool that they will both die like dogs? I was hoping to be at work or otherwise elsewhere if and when it all came to pass. I considered myself neither wise nor a fool, and I began to think more seriously on going west, if only I had the means to go west. I was without a car in those days. We were college students of varying degrees of seriousness, ranging from very to not at all. Sikorsky appeared to be the most serious, though it could have just been nerves. He suffered from anxiety when he was away from the working-class inner-city neighborhood of his youth. He remained on constant alert, spooked by rural landscapes in our small college town. In retrospect, perhaps rightfully so. Sikorsky wrote songs and poems, and his major was undeclared. Grimsrud was a business major from St. Paul, an ex-hockey player who played guitar. I was from Rhinelander and majoring in history, though I cannot remember why. They all called me Rhinelander, though I'd sworn not to return to the place, to my father's bait and tackle shop, where he waited smugly for my return, my failure. I was attempting to teach myself the bass on a second-hand Fender I acquired from Arno, a former housemate, who I'd heard still lived around town in a retired bread truck. Arno gave me my first lessons on the bass before moving out suddenly the previous summer. There had been artistic differences in the house, as well as disagreements concerning the contents of the refrigerator. I tried to mediate, but Grimsrud was adamant that we go forward without Arno in favor of a paying roommate. And this was when Sikorsky moved in. We were also lacking a drummer and had been looking for one that summer so we could start a band called Rhinelander, which we all agreed, though some grudgingly, sounded better than Grimsrud or Sikorsky. McNulty occasionally would disappear into the bathroom, our only bathroom, at the top of the stairs, or wander into the kitchen to eat whatever he pleased of our food from the meager cupboards and the old fridge in which we had each labeled our quarts of milk and blocks of government cheese and tubs of margarine and bags of lunch meat and white bread. McNulty ate our groceries, and we said nothing. We'd more or less lived in our living room before McNulty, drinking Canadian Club and sour, smoking weed and rocking out in naive bliss. Grimsrud's big Marantz receiver and turntable and floor-standing loudspeakers occupied one wall. The television did not pull in much channel-wise, an unwieldy console unit from another decade, inherited by someone or just abandoned by a previous tenant. We mostly kept it on for fuzzy green-tinged background visuals with the sound off in favor of the stereo and the glory of our collective collection of vinyl. And that, it gradually became clear, offered an unexpected point of reference, a serendipitous confluence with McNulty. Someone once said, I believe I heard, that music soothes the savage beasts. And similarly, we came to notice that McNulty dug music. He dug our music. He dug it like we dug it, that is, deeply and with a reverence beyond words. And so, after the first couple awkward and sleepless weeks, a shift occurred, and there were lulls of relative calm in our living room when he or one of us would drop the needle onto a record of McNulty's choosing. He'd occasionally omit what sounded like a reluctant grunt of approval while flipping through our crates of albums. He would happen upon some bootleg Stones or Charlie Patton or Furry Lewis and shake 'em on down. McNulty would on these occasions wordlessly pass around joints he rolled from his big bag of weed, and though the undercurrent of physical violence and menace did not entirely go away, it sunk a little beneath the surface as we carefully smoked without speaking. I wondered if I was the only one who felt this, but I kept my mouth shut about it. McNulty loved the blues. This should not have been a surprise, I suppose. Sometimes in the evening, when we had gathered the courage to return home and slunk exhausted back into our own house, McNulty would holler at us as we tried to slip off to our rooms without his notice. He'd holler at us to join him in the living room, and so we'd enter through the beaded curtain into what had once been our living room and what we had all come to silently consider McNulty's room. One of our records would be playing loud, louder even than we played our records, which was loud. His big bag of weed lay there on the coffee table, open and spilling onto the cafeteria tray on which we'd cleaned our own meager nickel and dime bags in the days before McNulty. McNulty's bag was comically huge and magical. It never seemed diminished, no matter how much we smoked from it. No wonder the bandoleros wanted it back. McNulty rolled great joints using several rolling papers licked together, deftly twisted in his scarred and meaty hands. His hands resembled train cars, battered and dented and heavy with cargo. And to our cautious glee, he could be almost generous in those moments, like a gruff and homicidal older brother. We spent hours then sitting in the living room as we once had before, smoking and listening to the blues and sometimes reggae, not saying much, if anything at all, maybe watching the shadowy figures on the silent television while the joint made its sacred journey around the room. McNulty, it turned out, played the harp. He played it damn well, something of a surprise, beautiful, soulful sounds emanating from an angry mass of tattooed scar tissue. He carried a harmonica in his back pocket and sometimes pulled it out to play along with the recording, or by himself, the blues like we had never quite heard them, live and authentic. And I, in spite of my fear of McNulty, could not help but picture him and his harp on stage with Rhinelander, the band, me, Sikorsky, Grimsrud, and McNulty playing bona fide, hard-earned blues with a drummer to be named later, righteously backing us up. But McNulty's contempt for us was so unambiguous and absolute, I didn't quite know how to pitch the idea to him. Okay, I'm gonna stop there, and do I have time for like a really short one? Okay. One of the things we did with this book is I also write a lot of flash fiction, really short pieces, and so I sprinkled little short ones through the book. Guess maybe just to flesh it out a little bit, but also just as little, kind of like Elise said, little connective tissue between the stories. So the stories in this book span quite a few years. I'll just say that, and some of them I wrote maybe 30 years ago. So it's a really unusual experience reading them now. It's almost like they were written by someone else, which is kind of a good thing sometimes. That was an older story. This is a relatively new one and one of the short ones, and I thought I'd end on something maybe more upbeat and complete. So this is called Fair Oaks Diner. Little reference to Richard Brautigan, if any of you are familiar with him. If you're not, go out and check him out. Fair Oaks Diner. This story begins with a rusting white sign on a brick building spelling the word eat in red neon. And as I'm driving past, the gravitational pull of it causes me to parallel park my truck out front. Also, it's snowing. This story is an acquaintance of a story called American Flag Decal by Richard Brautigan, though that story would likely deny this if the two stories would happen to meet in a perfectly ordinary diner like this one, where the old radiator is battling winter like a punch-drunk boxer who won't stay down. I order coffee and eggs and toast and hash browns. I've driven past this diner more times than I can count, resisting the sign, but now here I am at the counter drinking black coffee and waiting on my order. I heard an old friend's sister-in-law owns this place, and I think how I might say to her, "Hey, I knew your sister-in-law 25 years ago in St. Paul." But the only person behind the counter is a guy who looks like a junior heavyweight who's intently wishing he were someplace else, like San Diego. I can't see who's in the kitchen, so I content myself with the coffee and waiting and yesterday's newspaper. The only other characters are two retired guys at a table. Regulars, I guess, since the junior heavyweight knows their names. I picture another story, yet unwritten, where I'm an old sports writer who comes in every morning and they all know my name and stories. Behind the counter, a Winston-Salem display for packs of cigarettes sits sad and empty. The space inside like a small museum of the days when you could smoke in gymnasiums and in diners with your coffee while you waited for your order to come up. There are two different clocks on the wall, each with its own different version of time. Finally, here it comes. The junior heavyweight carries a plate piled with eggs, toast, and hash browns. He sets down the plate and refills my coffee. The story ends as I dig in and begin to eat. It's not the best eggs and toast and hash browns I've ever had, but there's plenty and there's hot sauce. As I eat, I see through the window the red glow from the sign on the falling snow and on my truck, waiting patiently for the page to turn. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Christopher. And last but not least, we have Jim Landwehr reading from his book, At the Lake.
Thank you. Tall guy. So my name is Jim Landwehr. I'm from Waukesha, Wisconsin. I'm happy to be here. Thank you to Dr. Tengdahl for all his hard work and your staff for the editing, the cover design. A little bit about the cover. This book was a picture taken by me at Spider Lake, which is up in Mercer area, and it's also known affectionately as the Dead Sea. As you can see, both the people fishing on it are sitting down, and there's no arc in their rod, so there's no fish in the Dead Sea. But it was kind of cool getting my daughter on the cover. It was just a well-done production from end to end. So thank everyone for coming too as well. A little bit about the book. It's 15 chapters. Each chapter is about a cabin I stayed at over the past 50 years. So from when I was a 5-year-old all the way till today. And some are sad stories, most are funny, and there's a little bit of heartwarming stuff in there too. So the other interesting fact about my book is each chapter starts with a poem from Gary Busha, who he writes haiku, and he writes these mini poetry books. So a plug for Gary. When I was going to do it myself, I was like, well, I could write a poem for each chapter. And then I thought, well, Gary does this, and he does it well. So we have a haiku for every chapter that talks about, he has a lot of books about the water and the lake. So plug for him. So with that, I will go into my reading, first of all, starting at Pleasant Lake, which is up in Hackensack. It's a house out in Hackensack. And this talks about an experience I had with my brother Rob fishing. It became evident early on in my fatherhood experience that the days of extended fishing outings with my brothers at any cabin came with new parameters. Leaving a child or two in the care of your wife on short notice while you went out in a boat fishing and drinking beer was just something no sane man would attempt without express written consent. No, the obligations brought on by these little bodies required carefully scheduled escapes. The collaboration between brothers usually took place beforehand to get the date, time, and specifics of fishing departure solidified, all the while ensuring pre-trip brownie points were sufficiently tallied. Furthermore, this request for guy time included a well-defined ETA and reciprocal provision for equal alone time for the spouse. It also required focused attention to the duties of fatherhood throughout the week. It was a gamble in hopes that when the fishing requests were made, sufficient credits and selflessness were accumulated to justify time in the boat with a brother or two. During the trip in 2000, Rob and I arranged to go out later in the week. We'd had an outing earlier in the trip and wanted to get one more serious fishing effort under our belts. As busy fathers working our way up the corporate ladders, these week-long vacations were often our only chance all year to get out together. Neither of us owned a boat, so the rental that came with the cabin served as our means to catch the trophy we'd waited all year to catch. After dinner that night, we met at the boat and loaded our gear. There were rods, tackle boxes, a small cooler with a couple of beers, and a pack of cigars covertly hidden away. The stogies served to remind us why we didn't take up the habit full time. Dreadful things, really. I've always said they are the vice you enjoy one day and then taste for the next 36 hours. It's the bad habit that keeps on giving. Yet I still look at them as part of any good fishing trip. And if smoking 3 cigars a year is going to kill me, well, pass the lighter. At least I'll die having all the dizziness of a good tobacco buzz and the memories that accompany fishing in a boat with my brothers. I primed the engine, pulled the ripcord, and we set off. We motored along the western shore looking for a spot with some decent vegetation. 10 minutes into our ride, I killed the engine near some emergent lily pads. Rob dropped the anchor and we started casting our Rapala lures in hopes of catching something, anything. As we fished, we talked about our lives. I was nearly 4 years into a new job at Waukesha County in Wisconsin, and Rob had a good position with the state of Minnesota. He worked for the Gaming Commission as an information technology administrator. Both jobs had their share of related stress, so chances to relax like we were this evening, were a welcome relief from those responsibilities. I stoked up one of my backwood cigars and offered one to Rob. He took it, lit it, and puffed until the end was glowing amber. At some point, we started talking about the family, both the immediate and extended Landwehr clan. After a few recollections of various dysfunctions, addictions, and general familial fuck-ups, I said, yeah, our family just has a little hint of hillbilly redneck in it, doesn't it? Rob broke out laughing. He pinched his thumb and index finger a half-inch apart and said, just a little. For some reason, his quick comeback brought me to uncontrollable laughter. The release was positively therapeutic, a letting go of the everyday stress of jobs, mortgages, and parenthood. It set the stage for even more humorous exchanges of stories between us about family and friends. This included people we loved who seemed stuck in bumbling cycles of bad choices and ill-informed decisions. While we laughed and smoked and cast, it occurred to me we weren't laughing in mockery. Rather, our amusement was coming from a deep well of love for family. Rob always held family first, as did I. But it was this exact quality, this caring, empathy, and mutual respect that frustrated us. We genuinely cared about those drifting from the lanes of relative health, normalcy, and happiness through their bad choices and apparent inability to correct their course. We loved them and wanted them to succeed, but we also knew we could not live their lives for them, nor intercede on their behalf. These friends and family would have to figure it out for themselves. This is not to say Rob and I had it all figured out. We had our share of setbacks and bad decisions in life too. We also knew our suburban picket fence lives were not for everyone either. But we both knew the adversity our family and specifically our mother had gone through based on some poor life choices by our father and stepfather. We knew life required a series of ongoing checks and balances on behavior patterns and subsequently taking corrective actions if needed. Life isn't rocket science, but it does require a little introspection and occasional denial of self in the interest of others. In a way, the boat we were sitting in was serving several functions as it rocked gently in the water. It was part psychiatrist's office as we took turns talking about our own childhoods and the role a birth number took for each of us in our family of 7 kids. It was part think tank for strategizing how to solve our problems or the problems of others and laying out what needed to happen to fix them. The confines of the 16-foot boat were part health spa as we relaxed under the amber glow of an August sun and built up our immunities with a healthy dose of laughter. Laughter so convulsive it almost hurt. And finally, the boat was part mental ward, as Rob and I related that we were both only one job lost from vodka bottle under the bed condition, not too far from those we joked about. Our mutual love and concern for our extended family was played out that night as we shared our perspectives. We agreed that despite life's hardships, family should always be there to catch the fallen. The older we got as brothers, the more we came to understand what it meant to be there for one another. He and I had strikingly parallel lives at that moment, and if nothing else, it was nice having a sibling there to cheer you on, to give you advice if you asked, and to share a covert cigar under the guise of an evening of fishing. There were no fish caught that night, and I guess that's okay. When it was all done, we fired up the motor and putted back to the lives we'd grown into, re-energized by the company of one another and the time alone we had to work some of it out. So that's a story about my brother Rob. On a sad note, he died tragically with cancer a few years back. So these times at the lake are pretty special. He's still looking down on us. This next piece I'm going to read is about going up with our kids to a different lake called Spider Lake. This is in the Spider Lake chapter. Most evenings we'd put the kids to bed after a day of running feral, and Donna and I would spend time in bed winding down with a book. One year, the mattress in our cabin was a bit too squishy for our liking, so Donna chose to take the couch and left me to the bed with the substandard mattress. We were both reading in our separate places, having put the kids down 45 minutes earlier. I thought they were fast asleep in their own twin beds in the other room when I heard Sarah call out, "Mom?" "What is it, Sarah? Go to sleep." "There's something in my room." "There's nothing in your room. Now go to sleep," Donna replied. We were both brutally aware of these techniques used to prolong their stay-up time, and this seemed like another false alarm intended to do just that. Another 5 minutes, Sarah called out again. "Mom, there's something flying in my room." "Sarah, it's probably just a bug or something. Now go to sleep." "It's not a bug," Sarah answered with a degree of certainty in her voice. Donna called out to me asking if I could check on Sarah. We frequently tag-teamed our parenting duties, and evidently it was my turn. I got up and walked into the kids' bedroom, and I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, so reassured her it was nothing, and left. "What was it?" Donna asked as I headed back to my room. "I didn't see anything. It might have been a June bug or something. If it were there now, it's gone," I replied and went back to my bedroom. 5 minutes later, Donna called out, "Jim, there's something behind the curtain out here." My demeanor quickly shifted from annoyed to an unpleasant feeling of dread. What was everyone seeing that I was not? I got up a second time and went out to play the role of the strong, fearless husband. "What is going on?" I asked with a hint of exasperation. "There's something moving and scratching behind this curtain here." Unsure of what to expect, I went over to the curtain and gave it a little shake. It was enough to free a small bat from its grip and into a wildly random flight pattern of these winged mammals. Of course, this flight pattern has been known to intersect with tall, non-winged mammalian hominids. "Ah, a bat," I said as I dropped to a low crouch. My fear of bats is real and ranks right up there with snakes and spiders. The fear usually brings out some less than brave instinctual responses. In my case, it almost always involves ducking as a form of tall guy self-preservation. These reactions are nothing to be proud of, but consistently come to the surface in moments of unexpected danger, like this ravenous bat in flight. Donna ducked and quickly moved closer to the cabin door. The bat circled the overhead light with the occasional random wild variations in both height and lateral extent. Its ability to avoid hitting obstacles yet still sustain a pattern of erratic zigzags, dips, and arcs was nothing short of impressive. As it continued its laps around the overhead light, I scanned the room for a weapon of self-defense. Near the cabin door, I spotted one of the kids' butterfly nets. They were used through the course of the week to catch frogs, minnows, and even the occasional butterfly. I wasn't sure if they were strength tested for bats, but at the moment it seemed like my best defense. Hunched like a bridge troll, I crept over and grabbed the net. From there, I pondered my counterattack. Do I try and catch it on the fly or wait until it lands? The former seemed like it had all sorts of potential for breaking windows, knocking over lamps, and the like. Instead, I decided to wait for it to land. Even bats need a break occasionally. In what seemed like 10 minutes, but was more likely 2, the bat finally landed on the same curtain it had come from. It was a perfect location for capture, actually. The curtain would provide a soft spot for the net, and the percussion of it hitting the curtain might shake the bat free and into it. I walked to the kitchen and grabbed a Chinette paper plate to serve as a cap to the net. It is amazing the tools one resorts to in the midst of a little chaotic panic. You stay by the door and get ready to open it when I catch this guy, okay? Yep, got it, she said. Bat hunting was a team sport. Sarah had gone silent by now, apparently drifting off as soon as the bug was no longer in her room. It is tough to say how she would have reacted if she knew it was a bat flying around. She was a fearless kid, though, and had a love for most animals. She used to take particular delight in my feigned reluctance in going to the small mammal building at the Milwaukee County Zoo. The building housed an extensive bat display that gave me the willies. Sarah, on the other hand, was fascinated by them. I moved stealthily over to the curtain where the bat was clinging. With a careful, measured motion, I slammed the net over the bat, provoking it to take flight into the net. I slid the Chinette plate between the net and the curtain, trying to contain my girlish squeals at the thought of it somehow getting out and flying at my face, or something similarly unlikely. Open the door, hon, I got it. I hustled to the front door and threw the net and plate into the yard, making sure it was positioned so the bat could fly free. We shut the door and breathed a sigh of relief. Well, that sucked, I said. Yeah, it must have come down the chimney or something, Donna said. You're probably right. Just to be sure, I'm going to check that flue. I checked it and made sure it was shut tight in case that this was some sort of homing bat or something. I didn't know much about the species, but wanted to take nothing for granted. We mentioned the bat to John and Sherry the next day, and they were the owners, and they agreed it was probably got in via the chimney. They emphasized it was not a big deal, but John gave the cabin a good exterior check over anyways to make sure it was sealed up tight. We had a good laugh about the fact that we were in nature, and when you are, these kinds of things happen on occasion. This is not to say we wanted it to happen again, and it didn't, but rather that these intersections with various forms of wildlife were part of the whole cabin experience. Thank you.
All right, wow, that was awesome. I gotta say, I got to work on all these books, and it's always such a privilege, but there's something so unique getting to hear the stories from the authors themselves. It's like my favorite part. All right, so now we're moving on to our Q&A. I'm a bit shorter than everybody else. I'm gonna move this down a little bit. I was thinking it'd be kind of fun if you have any questions, if you wanna come up here and ask it, and then you could go sit back down, since we have this whole in-person experience. And I'm also watching on YouTube if anybody wants to comment there. Otherwise, I have my own questions. So feel free if you wanna start heading down here, or if any come up along the way. So I guess I'll kick us off. I got a little fun question here, so we'll start with Jim and work our way the other way this time. That works for you. So what would you say is your most interesting writing quirk?
I guess I would have to say it's that I will not let my wife read any of my work until it's done, until it's published, and that drives her a little crazy, but she's a little too close to it, so, and she's also my worst critic, so I like to think I'm better than what she thinks I am. So it's one of those things. She reminds me that, you know, she could beta read for me, but I'm like, no, that's okay. I'll get it to you when it's done. So.
Wow, that takes a lot of effort to hide it until it's published.
Right.
So yeah, I applaud you. I don't think I could. I can't even handle surprises. Like, I get too excited and want to tell someone. So, Christopher, if you'd like to go next.
It's a tough question. I drink a lot of coffee. I don't know if that's quirky or not, but when I think about it, I think I kind of need to have coffee there when I'm drinking, which is probably, I think Faulkner always had whiskey apparently. That doesn't work for me. I just fall asleep. So, yeah, first thing in the morning, and I like to write in the morning. So I get up, make a big pot of coffee, good strong black coffee, and
You drink it throughout the day or just in the morning?
I try to stop around noon or 2.
You have more self-control than I do.
Yeah, just so I can get to sleep. Yeah.
Thank you. Elise, how about you?
Well, maybe just a momentary quirk. A necessary quirk was that I just because of space and the fact that I have 3 young boys, that I used to write in our little tiny greenhouse until number one, it got really, really hot, and then I couldn't write like during the day. I had to write really early, and then it blew away in a storm, so I couldn't write in there. So I don't know if that's exactly a quirk, but
Was that recent that it blew away?
that happened during the writing of this.
Oh, wow.
But I was not in there, and neither were the many plants. The seedlings were out, so
That's
it worked out. It wasn't great, but it worked out.
Wow. All right. Okay. So our next question is, if you could tell your younger writing self anything, what would it be?
Just do it. I didn't really start writing seriously until about 12 years ago, and I'm thinking, you know, if I would have gotten to it earlier, I would have gotten much further along. But it was my wife, bless her soul, that said, take a writing course, and that's what spurred it. So, yeah, it would just get down and start writing, and that would be my advice.
I guess I would say trust your voice and don't feel like you need to write like anyone else. You know, reading. I think reading is really the key to becoming a good writer. They're two sides of the same coin, and I can't imagine anyone wanting to be a writer unless they're first a reader. And so I would say read widely, read deeply, find the stuff that you love, and then write. But just trust your own voice. I think Keith Richards once said, every note you ever heard, what is it? Every song you've ever heard comes out in every note you play. And I think that's kind of true with writing too. That you know, each of us has a sort of unique set of books that we've read, songs we've heard. We've grown up in a specific place. We have heard certain voices and cadences and dialects, and that all is in there. And you have a unique voice, and you just need to trust it and let it come out on the page the way you talk. I think, although I mean my writing voice isn't the same as my speaking voice, but you know I think if you just trust it and don't worry about trying to be the next whoever. Those writers you love are in there. I mean, it'll come out kind of in osmosis, I think.
I guess I was going to say read widely as well to my younger self. So, I just really think reading lots of different things, and you know, I think I've come to that later on. Like I used to have like the genre that I would read, and I think it's really great to read lots of different voices. And then of course, just your butt in the chair and write. And it's pretty hard to do that sometimes, but I do think that's part of it.
Elise, that is the perfect segue into my next question about just sitting down to write. Because I know a lot of people deal with writer's block. I have heard some authors say that they don't have that problem, which, hey, that's great. That'd be awesome. But how do you get your creativity flowing?
Well, regarding block, I don't tend to run into that often, but when I do, I change my genre from fiction or nonfiction to poetry, and it just gets things going. And a lot of times I'll write a poem that turns into a short story. So the two feed off each other pretty well. So that's where I'm coming from. It's just all writing is fun to me. I'm working on a fiction book right now, short stories, and it's fun. It's funny to go from memoir, where everything is memory, to fiction, which you're making it all up, and it's wildly different, and it's just a lot of fun branching out a little bit. So.
I think writer's block generally comes from that inner critic where as you're writing, trying to write, you're putting expectations on yourself and on your work, and you're saying it's got to be good, and usually it's not in the first draft. But that's part of the process. I like to think of it as, there's two parts of the process. There's drafting and there's editing and revising. And usually writers are better at one or prefer one over the other. Like, I love to revise and edit. I can edit some of this stuff I've edited for 30 years. And probably would still be editing it if, Ross hadn't finally said, just send it in. And but, for me, facing the blank page and getting that first rough draft is what, is a challenge. But I think both parts of that process are necessary. And in order to do the drafting, you've got to turn off that editor. You've got to turn off that critical part of your mind and allow yourself to write, what may not be great. But good work comes from our unconscious. You've got to tap into that place where dreams come from. And even writing fiction, I think you're using some combination of experience and imagination, and you don't always know what's going to come from where. But I think in order to get that raw material on the page, you've got to give yourself permission to write badly, to just dump it on the page, and tell yourself, nobody ever has to see this until if and when I feel like it's ready, and I'm ready to send it out to a class or to a reader. And I think if you put those expectations on yourself, oh, this has got to be good, that's how that whole process just kind of comes to a grinding halt, at least for me.
Well, I will say the one time that it was I had extreme writer's block was during the pandemic. I think that was a really hard time for everyone. But I would say generally that if I find that I'm not moving forward with whatever I'm working on, that I really like to re-energize by getting outside, and I like to mountain bike and I like to run. And I think that getting away for a moment and just letting my body move, when yoga too, allows things to kind of lock into place, or even giving it a period of time and sleeping on it. And I think that sometimes, things when you're removed from it, things kind of lock in, or, something seems to switch,
This might be outsider's perspective. I grew up in San Antonio, Texas most of my life. I'm also a hermit though. But since being in Wisconsin, everyone in Wisconsin for the most part is really outdoorsy. So I like that you said that. Like I said, it could just be that I like to stay at home. But yeah, so it's cool that you said that. And since you're all Wisconsin writers, bring that in. You, Jim, you have a lot about nature in your memoir collection there. And then something that popped in my head, Christopher, and you were talking, I wasn't expecting to say this quote, but it's something like, now that you know you don't have to be perfect, you can be good. And I think that spoke a lot to what you were saying.
Yeah.
All right. My next question is, what do you hope people take away from reading your book?
I guess for me, it's that they can relate to it. With all my books, some of them are kind of niche books. The Boundary Waters book I wrote was about camping in the northern Minnesota in the Boundary Waters area, and it's pretty specific to people who like to do that. So I have to tie the stories in that to relatable things for the average reader who maybe doesn't like to camp or has never camped. I think this one is relatable in the sense that there's one story in here about a college party up at a cabin, and I'm with my girlfriend, and I'm forever futzing with the stereo, and she ends up crying and having a big fit because I'm not paying her any attention, and my wife goes, I can relate to Connie in this story. So it's relatable in maybe not a good way, but at least she was able to see, in fact, she saw me in it, and it's not like I neglect my wife, it's just something that she brought up, so.
I would just hope that the people who read it will enjoy it, will like it, and I don't expect everyone will. I think, if you write something that everybody likes, it's probably not very good. I mean, I would rather have a few people feel really strongly about it one way or the other than, to have everybody say, that's okay. I think it was Henry Ford who said no one, boy, I've got all kinds of quotations, don't I? Henry Ford said nobody ever went broke underestimating the taste of the American public. Yeah, I mean, people who read short stories, it's a pretty small group, and I think probably getting smaller. It's kind of like the people that read poetry. But I think there always will be people who appreciate short stories and poetry and literature, and I don't expect this to end up on the best times list or anything, but that's not why I write. Yeah, I hope somebody likes it. I guess I'll just say that, and if it evokes strong feelings, I don't know. Maybe if even having somebody hate it, that might not be a bad thing either. If I piss off the right people, that's good too.
As far as when I was thinking about this piece as I was writing it, one thing that I was thinking about that actually kind of brings all of the short pieces together was this idea of renewal, and that's kind of how all of the chapters function. Each piece or a section is kind of through the phases of the moon, as well as like seasonal phases, and there's also the birth of a child. It happens throughout, so the gestation of life. And so I just had read a lot of pieces where I really, really loved them, but at the end I came away and I thought, oh my gosh, I can't go out and do anything now that I read this. It just makes me, sometimes it just feels like it rips your heart out. So I was trying to write this piece with the idea of renewal and coming away. Not that it's not just, nostalgia of the Midwest. I think it's Midwest Gothic, but I do think that I wanted to have this idea of renewal, so I hope people feel that.
I love that Midwest Gothic. I don't know if I've heard that before. I really like that. And, since I got a sneak peek reading Elise's book, a lot of the characters, get to meet, and it's just really cool having those interactions. We had another book that came out last year called Township, or the beginning of this year, I think, January, and you got to see the characters, intermingle, and that's just so cool and really special to read. Okay, so my next question, unless anytime you guys can come on up. Okay, so what part of the story of your book, or story from your book, was the most difficult to write?
I don't know, there's some moments about my brother who passed away that were tough to write, because I wanted to do it justice to the relationship we had, so that was hard. The interesting thing about the writing of this book is, unlike Block during pandemic for you, this was written almost exclusively during the pandemic, and I did it all in longhand, which is unlike I've usually done it at the laptop, and that just provided me, when you write it down and then you take it to the laptop, you're doing your first edit when you start transcribing it. So yeah, that's off topic, but yes.
I lived in New Orleans for 16 years, and from Wisconsin originally, but was in the South for quite a few years, 16 of them in New Orleans. And I was there for Hurricane Katrina, and there's a few New Orleans influenced stories or New Orleans set stories, but there's one in there that's a post-Katrina story, and I think that was probably the hardest one for me to write. I was editing a magazine down there at the time, and I edited a special issue of writing about New Orleans post-Katrina that was difficult to do, but it was easier for me to do than to actually write myself. For some reason, I couldn't write fiction for several years after that happened. But I did start writing nonfiction at that time. I think it was the first time I realized that maybe my life was interesting enough to write about. So yeah, and there was, New Orleans is a difficult place to write about anyway, just because so many people have written about it, and there's so many cliches. And you know, as a Midwesterner down there, for a long time, I didn't feel like I even wanted to try or had a right to write about it. But after my experiences with Katrina, I thought, yeah, I got some things to say about this now. So. Yeah.
I think that two of the characters, and I'm not going to get too in depth with them, but this grandfather and granddaughter, I think their relationship kind of the conclusion of this book and kind of the conclusion of their relationship and how they interacted together. I think that was probably one of the tougher pieces to write emotionally. But I think that just like figuring out how they all fit together and where the pieces went and like rearranging it was also sort of challenging, I think, and I went through a lot of different iterations of this, so.
Okay, so I came up with this question a little last minute. I'm so happy I did, and I don't know why I didn't think of it, but how did you guys hear about the Cornerstone Press?
I was at a writing retreat / conference in Madison, and Dr. Tengdahl was there on a panel of presses, and I don't know, a sales pitch or whatever, just kind of caught my eye. Plus I knew Kim Sir, who has been published through Cornerstone, and she had a great experience with it, and I thought, it's up north, so it goes with the whole Up North at the Lake book. It sounds like it's a great operation, and it's a Wisconsin press, so that was why I went with it, and I reached out to him, and he said, yeah, send us your work, so here we are.
Well, you have to give Kim some credit here too. I learned about Cornerstone Press because of Kim Sir's book. Nothing to Lose. When I moved back to Wisconsin in 2015, I was editing a literary magazine called Midwest Review, which is now being published here at UW-Stevens Point, and which makes me very happy that it's found a home and some great editors, and it's something the students will be able to work on too, I assume. So, but I published a story of Kim's in that magazine, so what a small world it is. And then when her book came out, I got a copy of the book and saw the press, looked it up, and saw that they were looking for specifically short story collections from the Midwest. And I figured there was enough Midwest stories in here. This is a book, again, I said that I've been working on for years. So I think ultimately persistence is as important or more important than talent. So those of you that want to be writers and want to get published, it's about hard work and persistence and just sticking with it. You don't have to be like a genius. Often some of the most talented writers I knew in graduate school, they just didn't do the work, and they're not, I don't know what they're doing now. They're probably lawyers or something. But now I forgot what I was saying.
Okay. I guess I was looking specifically at Wisconsin's small independent or university Wisconsin presses, just because I thought that was this would be the right home for what I was writing. So I'm happy I did.
Well, we are also very thankful. Like, you guys bring a lot to us, and we're so happy to be able to publish these books. And it was so fun working on them. Like, I know editing is just so much fun, at least from my perspective. And a lot goes into the press. It's just, it's a great experience. And like I said, it's a privilege every time. I was talking to you guys earlier, I never thought I'd get that opportunity to work for press in college. So this is my last question, but I'm gonna also open it up to you guys if you want to say any last remarks. Christopher mentioned, in his one story before phones. Well, now it's a very tech age. So if you want to tell the audience and those watching online where they can find you on social media and how some readers can interact with you.
Yeah, so I have a author website, jimlandwehr.com. I'm also on Facebook, author Jim Landwehr, and Instagram. Yeah, so Google me, it'll come up.
I do have a website. I've got a guy, I built it myself, and it kind of looks like it, so. I mean, it's not bad, but, I use the template. But I know a younger guy who knows how to do this stuff, and he's rebuilding it for me. And so I should have a nice, shiny new website soon. I'm not on social media. I'm on my website. It says I'm anti-social media, which I am. And my publisher's probably not happy to hear that, but
Where you Sean, Chris?
Yeah. I spent election night down in Madison at the Overture Center. I scored some free tickets to see Fran Lebowitz. I don't know if you know her, New York writer, very cranky old Jewish woman, who I feel like was kind of a kindred spirit. She was talking about how she doesn't even have a cell phone. She's like, everybody, is all upset because I don't have a cell phone. They're saying, we can't reach you. And I said, you don't need to reach me. I'm not a brain surgeon. I've got a phone. It's at home hanging on the wall. I was like, oh, I want to be like that. But I do have a cell phone, so, and a website.
All right. I also have a website, and I do have a Facebook page. So both are my name. So
Awesome.
I don't know.
Well, I imagine we're probably linked, like, you guys,
Yeah.
the Cornerstone site, do you have, like,
You can also find everything on the Cornerstone Press website.
there you
There
go.
you go.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, for those listening online, everything's on the Cornerstone Press website in case you couldn't hear from the audience. All right. Any last comments? Same for the audience.
Don't make them come down here. If anybody has a question, just holler out. Raise your-
Okay, there you go.
I'd be too shy to come down.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I get a little excited. Okay, any last comments from you guys tonight?
No, again, thank you for having us, and thank you guys for coming out on a rainy night. We were at at a conference, and it had gotten real dark, and it was raining, and the guy goes, "It's appropriate. We're here on a dark and stormy night." So, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you all. Really appreciate you coming out.
All right, I'm going to let the sales team take over. Dr. Tagenhall, were you going to say something? Or are you just walking? Okay, cool. We're just going to wait a minute. But yeah, after that, we're going to have a book signing and our book sale. And just thanks again, everybody, for coming. It was so cool to do it in person. Yeah, just thanks again. And thanks for our authors for driving all this way to see us.